Well, thank you, Mike, and thank you, Industrial Cyber, and thanks everybody for joining. So I'm going to be talking about operational resilience in manufacturing, but this really applies across the board to all, critical infrastructure. And really, I'm going to focus on building a secure access strategy because I think this is kind of one of the low-hanging fruit things that you can do that have a big impact if you can address how people are accessing your critical assets. So with that, I'll get started. I think just to kind of take this at a very high level, what we're seeing in the industry and in manufacturing in particular is market forces that are shaping the way people think about how to do remote access, from remote access to zero trust, from network access to isolating protocols and disconnected access, and I'll get into what that means in a moment. Really from general purpose access to purpose built for OT and ICS. So you can think of SRA and PAM and things that have been in IT for a long time. And a lot of those types of technologies sometimes get applied um, to OT and ICS with limited success. And I'll get into why on that. From uncontrolled OEM access to secure auditable OEM access, or really third-party access in general. But in the case of in manufacturing, it's most of the third parties are OEMs. And then from static controls to AI, enhanced access intelligence. I'll talk briefly on that. And then from compliance burdens to compliance first designs. So we'll go through each one of those. So why secure access deserves a new conversation. Obviously, critical infrastructure, in particular manufacturing systems and the whole industry 4.0, everything from IIoT and so forth is getting connected. It used to be in the, not that distant past, at least from my perspective, that things were fairly disconnected. You didn't have really things connecting to the cloud in a big way from a manufacturing plant. You do now. And really just in general, everything is getting more connected. There's just more digital assets that are communicating, hopefully just controlled communication within your enclaves, but sometimes they communicate in all different ways, and it's hard to get a handle on how we secure that communication. So, secure remote access is no longer optional. And when I first started in the industry, 7, 8 years ago in OT. I come from background in IT. One of the first things it says we'll never ever do secure remote access. And then obviously we had COVID and all of that, and then things changed pretty rapidly during that period. So, but the traditional methods of doing this are just not working today. They're failing from a security perspective and also from an operational resiliency perspective as well. The rise in third-party OEM access is creating invisible risk, and that means if you're not bringing that as the asset owner, if you're not bringing that access through your systems that you own and you monitor and you record and so forth, then obviously you don't have visibility into that. It's hard to quantify the risk and whether it's secure or not when they're connecting into your environment. Compliance is now designing architecture, not just auditing it. So this is really about being proactive in using compliance to your advantage as opposed to after the fact when you have to go back and see what happened and you don't have all the tools to do that. If you're building it into your design, then you have that ability to meet and show that you're meeting compliance in a much more efficient way. Legacy access tools weren't built for this environment. If, we talk about, VPNs and so forth. I mean, VPNs came out during the Clinton administration. That's a long time ago in tech. So again, not built at all for accessing critical infrastructure. So let's talk briefly about legacy infrastructure, right? Everything in legacy, when I talk about legacy, I'm talking about People think about VPNs, we have jump servers. You may or may not have multi-factor authentication. If you do, it may be dated. There may be domain controllers and things like that, but there's essentially you're doing credential-based access. The endpoint risk is inherited, meaning a lot of times the access to these systems, the actual communications goes back out to the endpoint. So the endpoint becomes part of that implicit trust, and that becomes a big problem if if you have an issue with your endpoint and it's been compromised, which in many cases that becomes, or in most cases that becomes the entry point into launching ransomware and other nefarious things, malware and so forth. Um, so the movement here is really, when we talk about zero trust, we're really talking about just-in-time least privilege access. So very granular controls, role-based access controls, time-based access controls, and doing that based on identity, right? So identity is the new firewall. Heard this probably, but it's very true. We gotta do things based on the actual identity and validate that. And then we also have to contend with universal access, meaning this access is now remote. It could be on site or it could be OEM, either on site or remote. So with all of that, we want to make sure that there's a frictionless way to access, but at the same time, not exposing the network. So really having explicit trust down to the application or the system, and then be able to keep the connection to that secure and not expose the network, right, to the remote endpoint. So just a little bit on why this is a big issue, right? So, the majority, I won't go into every single percentage here, but you can see over 3/4 and sometimes 9/10 of the issues come from remote abuse, remote services in the form of, could be RDP or other services, but this is a major attack vector for ransomware and other attacks on industrial sites. So let's talk about going from sort of the general network access to a disconnected access and what that really means. So I'm going to kind of go through a little bit of a chronology of how we were securing access to, well, really any systems, but in particular, we're going to be showing, critical assets here. And right, we go back to VPNs, right? Okay, so what we're doing there is we're encrypting the data stream from the user to the asset, right? Or the network, really. And then that's obviously been around for a very long time. The way that we try to control it in the industrial environment is we add a jump server. So we have a way of monitoring and controlling that access to the assets in the enclave, which provides a little bit more security than just network authentication, which is really what VPNs provide. Now we want a little bit more granularity in that we can do, what we call RPAM, or remote privilege access management. We can wrap that based on the role, the time, the location, system. Obviously this helps on the security perspective, but again, we're exposing the network out to the endpoint. ZTNA, again, additional application device profiling, maybe some behavioral analysis. But we're still not completely protecting and isolating that critical network while also being able to provide the ability to access it. So this is really where we see that the shift here is, hey, we really need to break this connection. We need to keep the network and the communication protocols local, and then only expose the display back to the user. And obviously it needs to be encrypted as well, but we don't want to provide a way for using remote services for a third party, especially when you don't have control over those third party endpoints to be able to access the network. So we really want to limit that attack surface by essentially breaking the connection and keeping the protocols local in the critical network. Okay, so we're talking about general purpose access to purpose built. So in OT environments, uh, we want to be able to support OT protocols. We also really want to think about the difference here in who's accessing these systems. In IT, you have a huge employee user base. They're always on the systems. Things are centralized in the cloud. In the OT environment, it's actually over the last decade or two, it's been moving in the opposite direction. There's digital assets everywhere now, and new digital assets are being put out there, whether it's in substations, wind farms, new manufacturing lines, wherever it may be. There are digital assets everywhere in the OT environment, and majority of people that access these tend to be third parties that need access to those systems to patch, troubleshoot, and so forth, right? Uh, and then, in terms of the actual network itself, it's really engineered for being disconnected and also being able to contend with lower bandwidth and things like that without cloud dependencies. So this is a much different way of connecting to these digital assets and critical assets than you have in the IT environment. OT teams, really what ends up happening in OT is the OT team becomes also the IT team from an administrative point of view. They end up having to manage these systems. So, without having a lot of dependencies, you want to be able to have a solution that's simple enough for the OT team to manage, but while also not, you don't want that to be burdensome so they can still do their day job. And then if they have to do some IT light administration, they can do that without dependence on, full IT team within the OT team, right? So that's a key. Multi-user collaboration, session supervision, all these things are really around safety, as well as making sure that people are trained on the systems as well, and that is a key part of this. Okay. Compliance, again, as I mentioned before, is a very important part of this. So we want to make sure that the compliance is focused on the access focus on OT standards and mandates. Okay, uncontrolled OEM access to your assets, and I'm going to kind of walk through this from sort of the you know high risk and maturity level 1 up to maturity level 4. And maybe I can just ask a question here to everybody in the audience is, this is a yes or no question. Has anyone had a security incident involving an OEM or a third party into your environments? And we'll just say over the last couple of years. I'd be curious to know just a yes or no if you've had one, and see how many yeses versus nos we get. I'm curious myself, but I think the rest of the audience will be curious too. So we'll take a look at that. So in terms of maturity level 1, I think this is kind of where we were in most environments, is even 5 years ago, right? There was a lot of manufacturers, OEMs, and really in every industrial environment that were having always on access. There was, the asset owners were kind of like, well, that's the OEM's job to make sure they're secure and connecting to their systems, and they make sure everything's up and running. But then things were, ransomware comes up, and then there's security incidents, and then okay, now we need to get control over this. And so there's a big kind of sea change happening that we see right now as people are moving up these maturity levels. I think, what I've seen 5 years ago, people were mostly in, maturity level 1, 2, and maybe 3. So there was, hey, we're going to schedule remote access. We're going to keep it very limited. We'll turn on access on a as needed basis. We don't really have an audit trail. We see a lot of that. If there was a little more advanced advancement. We go, okay, we have more authentication, we have a little bit better identity enforcement, we have jump servers to manage each OEM and how they access their different assets. Again, the endpoint connectivity and the protocols are being streamed back out. So I think up until the last couple of years, really, most organizations were either in maturity 1, 2, or 3. What we're seeing now is that people are really moving into maturity 4 and understanding that zero trust needs to be employed, because the manufacturers at the end of the day own the risk, they own the assets, they own the risk, right? So they're looking at more brokered, just-in-time access, fully auditable, meaning we want to be able to see a full access recording, watch a movie of what each OEM did when they connect to the system, and manage and monitor the assets and how those assets are being accessed, uh, full stop, and without exposing the endpoint to those networks, without having the endpoint really become part of the network, and swapping packets to remote OEMs back and forth into the critical infrastructure. So we don't want to do that. We want to make sure they can operate and be able to update and troubleshoot, but not expose that critical network. So that's kind of the move that we're seeing now, is into that maturity 4 phase. Okay, static controls to AI intelligence. This is very new, but we're seeing a lot more access based on what we can garner from being more adaptive and contextual based on information that we have, that we can train AI models on making sure we have risk-based login, authentication, user behavior, signals and sessions, and session flagging and things like that, based on real-time monitoring, real-time AI analysis on users and sessions. And this is something that is going to be very big over the next few years. And I think it's going to become common within 5 years. This is very interesting. We talk about compliance burden to compliance first. Again, I think previously, when there's an incident and then there's audits, there's a manual process. We're looking at violations. It's really difficult. We're trying to, okay, hopefully we have packet capture. We're going in through all the sessions to see, who accessed what. This is, laborious task of trying to do an audit when you don't have the visibility and the audit trail, or rich data and rich audits of the network, right? So things now, I think, by building in the architecture here of having, like I said, just-in-time, zero trust access, always, continuous monitoring of these networks. Now you can build in session recording. You have much more metadata. You can watch video on what happened. The role they had, the time of day, the purpose, and then obviously building in the compliance frameworks and reporting into the architecture, right, that meet all of the various compliance reporting. And obviously in manufacturing, 62443 is huge, right? So real quick, this is kind of the last slide, and then I'll get any questions from folks. This was a case study that we ran into for a big electronics manufacturing case study. And this was not a typical security issue or security incident, but what we found here was that there was a number of challenges they had. Obviously, meeting compliance, they wanted better visibility and control over changes in maintenance, but the one that really hurt the most was they had an internal developer that was doing programming of their PLCs, and they had no way of knowing what the person did. They left, and they took the code with them, and there was 9 months of work that they just had no idea that they had paid for, right? So if this was being monitored and recorded, the session being recorded, they could go back and see everything that was programmed and everything that was done. And again, as AI comes into this, in the future, you could almost replicate all of that information back and get back to status quo, right? If somebody that kind of thing happened and somebody left, you may miss a day instead of, wow, we got to do this all over again. So that was a case study there where the need for having better audits on what, and this was the case of a local user, not a remote user. So when we talk about secure access, this is super important. So, outcomes really, the reduced downtime and saving money is a big thing here, right? With having that, whether, that's for saving money from an incident like this, or, really from a training perspective and being able to have videos made without having, on-site training and things like that. You can distribute videos and show, maybe junior technicians how the procedure's done or set of procedures are done across, your enterprise. Um, Again, accelerated incident response is big too. I'm going to go and look into the chat, and it looks like interesting. So uh, we had 4 responses to if there's been a security incident over the last couple of years. 2 said yes. 1 said they've had a couple of scares, but not, an incident. And then 1 said no. All right. So that's not good, right? If it's not a huge data set here with 4 people, but if 50% have had a security incident, that's pretty serious. Okay. Well, thank you. I'm open for any other questions if you want to drop them in the chat. I think we have a few more minutes until we're up here. Okay, I got a question. We have an OEM connecting via VPN. It's hard to know they do without a secure remote access solution. Exactly. Yeah. So we've had customers that had OEMs, multiple OEMs with always on VPN connections. And we had one particular customer, very large multinational customer, in fact, that were compromised through an always on VPN connection. And they decided to stop that and take control with a zero trust solution. So, there are solutions out there. We're at XONA, we provide this type of solution, but there's certainly others out there as well. So this is not, unique to us. There's solutions out there that can help resolve this solution, right, and provide a really a secure access solution, a secure remote access solution, as opposed to a VPN, which is not a secure access solution. It's really just a way of encrypting data over a network, essentially. But we have that today on the internet. Everything is encrypted. So yeah, it really provides more of a network authentication. You have to have a lot of stuff behind it to provide some level of security, in terms of the actual access and identity-based access to your assets. So, okay.
Bill, do you have a interesting case study or another client that had been compromised, and give a little bit more detail what happened in their case and how you went in and helped them in that instance?
Yeah, as I mentioned before, we actually had a large customer that had, I don't know the exact number, but let's say at least a dozen different OEMs connecting. They had a lot of different types of systems. And this was I'll just say it was a maritime customer. So you can think of that as, having lots of different systems that, from a utility perspective, but obviously other critical systems as well. And they were compromised by a third party OEM, and they decided, okay, we are going to shut down all of our OEM connections because of this incident. And then they had these OEMs have to come overnight, to different ports of call to solve problems, and that got expensive super quick, right? And having on-site access, especially when you have a moving network, and not to mention that, but some of these could be issues that obviously would cause delays and could, they could lose a lot of money. This is in the cruise industry. So what they did was they launched a kind of a vendor agnostic remote operations program. And we were able to come in and be that solution for them so they could protect the network, and then and the access controls could be applied, both in their private cloud as well as on the ship itself. And then all OEMs had to register through their network and then be able to operate those systems, whether in port or out on the open water. But that was an example of, okay, we're going to tell our OEMs that you can't use your solution to do this because we just don't have an audit trail over what you're doing, right? And we need to have that, right? From a GRC perspective, this is where they went, and this is really kind of that's a different than manufacturing, but we're seeing the same theme play out, in energy manufacturing across the board right now. So
Sure. Yeah, no, that makes complete sense. So that's I'm glad it was something that yeah, it carries across, even though, yeah, cruise ships have their own challenges of being like small cities, right, in and of themselves. So they have a little bit of everything.
yeah, yeah, and they have yeah, and it was interesting because you had some OEMs who were like, this is great. I don't have to worry about it. I don't have to, then there were others that were, we've been doing it this way for 20 years. We're not going to, we don't want to change. Like, what are you talking about? So it's
Right.
just, it's, and I think but it's needed, right? I think there needs to be, really from a GRP, and this really goes up to the board level, right? I mean, you need to have good governance and controls and, and meeting the compliance and all that. And there's no way of understanding any of that. And you have no governance if you don't have control over who's connecting to your ship, right? Or manufacturing plant or that, right? And
Anything.
yeah, that's something that is this is low hanging fruit. This is something that can be implemented. Obviously there's politics involved, but the technology is out there. You can deploy something like this, and this is as immediate impact in reducing your risk, right? So,
For sure. For sure. Well, absolutely. And thanks for coming and for the presentation. I think a lot of people got a lot of great
thank you.
use out of it and a lot of tips and tricks. So definitely looks like a lot of great feedback. So yeah, no, thanks
Yeah,
again.
great. Thank you, Mike.
And yeah, I'm sure we'll cross paths in the
Yeah,
future.
I'm sure soon. All right.
So
Take care.
definitely.